Welcome to the hearing for hearing stream 6, which addresses a number of rezoning requests throughout the city, throughout Napier City. With me today are Commissioner Annette Brosnan and Commissioner Van Voorthausen, and we will be mostly hearing from submitters today, although we will be hearing from the reporting officer, Ms Morgan, very shortly, who has circulated not only her opening statement and responses to panel questions that were pre-circulated, but also give us some updates on her discussions with various submitters and her current recommendations in terms of rezoning and various plan provisions that relate to those rezonings. So welcome to the hearing. We are today and tomorrow, the hearing will finish tomorrow afternoon. So without any further ado, I'll turn to Ms Morgan to talk to her further opening statement first, and then we'll lead on from there, if you don't mind.
Okay, certainly. Good morning, Commissioners. So just to clarify, would you like me to talk through my original opening statement first,
yes,
and then the follow-up?
Yeah, if it's easier to update things as you go through that, that's fine, or if you want to leave your update until the end,
okay.
We'll see how we go.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
So yes, good morning. I'm Rachel Morgan. I'm a planner and director at Barker & Associates, and I have been engaged as a consultant planner to support the council with this hearing stream. So then just moving down to paragraph 3 of my opening statement, I have been involved in various aspects of developing the PDP, but more recently I have been working on behalf of Napier City Council, the Hastings District Council and the Regional Council to assist with preparing the future development strategy, which is particularly relevant to this topic. But I have been involved in other related projects, including development of the Napier spatial picture and the high-level structure plans, which I will refer to, as well as other structure planning work which is relevant to this topic. So I'm more than happy to take questions as I go through, or leave them to the end, just whichever you prefer.
Okay, thank you.
And then just moving through to the overview of the zoning strategy at paragraph 5. Noting there that the notified PDP zoning does provide for a significant shift in the level of development enabled within the urban area, and that includes enabling additional heights and densities in the city centre, mixed use and centre zones, as well as the introduction of the high and the medium density residential zones in close proximity to public transport and existing centres and amenities. So the extent of those commercial zones in the notified PDP were largely, or are largely, the same as the extent under the operative district plan. And as I'll talk through shortly, there have been a number of submitters which have requested changes to that, which I have responded to in the 42A. And just noting that the notified PDP did not propose to zone any new greenfield growth areas. The thinking there is that would flow through from the recommendations of the future development strategy, and in that similar vein, there are various submissions that have sought greenfield rezoning through this process. So the notified, just moving down to paragraph 6, the notified zoning, particularly for the high and the medium density residential zones, was principally informed by the accessibility analysis that was undertaken for the Napier spatial picture and the high level structure plans. And that accessibility analysis was undertaken by a colleague of mine at Barker & Associates, and that was designed to provide the evidence base necessary to support rezoning under Policy 5 of the NPSUD. And just noting there that public consultation of the Napier spatial picture was undertaken in 2021 as part of the draft district plan, and the future development strategy, which has also been through a public consultation process, built on that work and provides for increased density and diversity of housing, as I have noted in paragraph 6 there. And the focus of intensification really reflects a number of important factors. That includes, firstly, the high demand for housing in Napier over the next 30 years, which equates to about 6,700 additional dwellings in the long term. But also the need to protect the versatile soils of the Heretaunga Plains, which was a key theme coming through submissions strongly on the future development strategy, as well as the need to ensure that communities are resilient to the effects of climate change and the risks from natural hazards. And again, that was another key theme that came through feedback on the future development strategy and other related processes.
Can I ask a question? Sorry to stop you there. The additional 6,700 dwellings, in terms of the rezoning of various parts of the city and the provision for intensification, how much of that is built into the sort of the feasible level of development? Because you don't rezone an area to, say, high-density residential and expect the whole area to overnight be that. How did that calculate into the strategy?
Yes, I have provided some numbers in the opening statement. I'm just trying to find where that is. Okay. But that came through the future development strategy work that we did. Mm-hmm. So just to explain that, we engaged, as part of that project, we engaged market economics to do some capacity analysis to support the future development strategy. And that not only looked at plan-enabled capacity, which is what you're talking about, but also feasible and realisable capacity. Mm-hmm. And within the urban area, that analysis was based on the zoning that was proposed through the Napier district plan. So what that showed, and I will just find it here, it might be in my 42A report, sorry, if you just give me one moment. I've got the exact numbers. It is, if I can refer you to page 14 or paragraph 45A of my section 42A report. So that talks about under the PDP zoning there is potential capacity for approximately 4,070 dwellings to be realised by the market, as well as approximately 2,085 dwellings in existing zoned and consented greenfield areas in Napier. So that includes sites like Whararangi Road, for example. So 4,070 dwellings is the key number there, which are feasible and realisable based on the PDP zoning.
Can you just explain the difference between feasible and realisable for me?
So feasible, so firstly it starts with plan-enabled capacity, which is the number of dwellings that could theoretically be constructed under the PDP rules. Right. Then there's an assessment of what amount of that could be developed on a site, and a landowner could turn a profit essentially. And there's quite a basic feasibility exercise that market economics goes through to determine that. The realisable component, there's two aspects to it. The most important one for the future development strategy is making some assumptions around how much of that feasible capacity would actually be taken up by the market, because not every landowner, just because they could turn a profit building a few units on their site, doesn't mean that they'll actually want to do that, and they might be quite happy living with their houses as it is. So then what market economics does is they apply quite a simple uptake rate to that feasible capacity number based on observed trends in other similar sized cities and a range of other assumptions. So it might be, for example, depending on the typology, the uptake for apartments might be quite a lot lower, but the uptake for terraced housing or detached housing might be higher.
So it looked at sort of the local demands and things as well.
Correct. Yes, that's right. It's quite a nuanced process that market economics work through to develop those numbers. The infrastructure capacity is also another component of that realisable capacity, but that, for the purpose of the FDS, we did that at the end. So the key difference is really that uptake rate.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
So,
paragraph 7. Sorry.
Paragraph 7. All right. So paragraph 7, this is really talking about the change in amenity values, and I do acknowledge the concerns that a number of submitters have outlined regarding the change in character and intensity of development that would result from the high and medium density residential zones. That, if realised to its potential, that would result in quite a high degree of visual change within existing neighbourhoods, with potential impacts on existing amenity values, including shading, loss of existing building form, and changes to privacy and that sort of thing. And I understand you've heard from my colleague Ms Lawson about these matters through the recent residential zone topics. But I do want to acknowledge that these are relevant effects. They are also relevant to the topic of rezoning as it relates to the extent of those zones. But it is important to balance that, in my opinion, balance that with the potential positive effects of intensification, particularly in terms of the increasing range of housing choices that would be available within accessible locations, and that those sorts of benefits are realised or are identified as a benefit in Policy 6 of the NPSUD. And in my view, the proposed extent of those high and medium density residential zones is really seeking to achieve a balance between those outcomes, but then also taking into account those broader strategic drivers around needing to protect the highly productive soils of the Heretaunga Plains, and respond to natural hazards, as I've talked about in the earlier paragraph. The matters raised by submission, matters raised in submissions, happy to take that as read, and then particularly in terms of the recommendations in the Section 42A report, perhaps I can just talk through those from paragraph 16 onwards, if that works. That's really just, it really just sets out a summary of all of the recommended changes. I have had a range of pre-hearing meetings, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then in terms of moving down to paragraph 16, responses to pre-circulated evidence, I've listed all of that evidence there. Mm-hmm. And now if I perhaps talk through each of those in turn. Firstly, starting with paragraph 18. So this relates to the potential rezoning or the requested rezoning of 1 Cray Street to neighbourhood centre zone, and I understand the submitter will be talking, I think, later today. Yeah. I have reviewed that evidence, but I do maintain that my recommendation to retain the notified zoning of general residential zone, really just given that small scale nature of the site. Moving through to paragraph 19, Alan Peterson supports the proposed rezoning of 68 Franklin Road to settlement zone, and that relates to my broader recommendations around rezoning at Bayview. I have also reviewed those legal submissions filed by Jack Brownlee Investments Limited. They haven't requested any site-specific provisions. I did acknowledge that there might be an opportunity for that, but that hasn't been requested, so my recommendations stand as per the Section 42A report. Moving down to paragraph 20, this relates to 2 submission points, the first being Bayswater Vehicles Limited and the second being Goldwater AU Limited, which relates to some proposed rezoning around the city centre to mixed use, which I support. The submitter there has requested applying the city fringe control overlay to those sites, and that overlay to firstly to clarify what it actually is, it applies to the full extent of the mixed-use zone surrounding the city centre and provides for a more enabling framework for hospitality and retail activities via Rule 4 of the mixed-use zone. So by virtue of the site's location immediately surrounding the city centre, I agree that it would be appropriate to apply the city fringe control area to those additional areas that I recommend be rezoned, particularly given the relatively small scale of the sites and the level of hospitality and retail enabled by Rule 4. Moving down to paragraph 21, this relates to the submissions from Burkitt Commercial 2021 Limited around the rezoning at Awatoto. I have had some further correspondence with Mr Kay on this matter by email over the last couple of days, but I do maintain that further analysis is required to inform any rezoning of that land. Particularly in terms of the quite clear, in my view, RPS requirements around what information is required to inform a rezoning. That includes things like a structure plan, for example, which would need to be provided. And I do have some concerns around the suitability of rezoning that land in the face of uncertainty around the location and extent of those future flood protection works. And that area was discussed in quite a bit of detail through the hearing process for the future development strategy. Moving down to paragraph 22, Emerald Hills Joint Venture. They have helpfully provided some further evidence on the background to the exact zoning extents for that area. And as I understand it, it arose through a recent subdivision, perhaps not that recent, subdivision consent between the adjoining lots rather than it relating to a substantive effects-based reason. So in the light of that clarification, I agree with the analysis provided and support those minor amendments to the general residential zone boundary that are requested, noting that the precinct provisions that apply there and the structure plan are really the key method for achieving the site-specific outcomes sought for that area. Moving down to paragraph 23, Marae Nui Golf Course. So again, this is sort of in a similar vein to Awatoto. I just don't have enough information before me at this time to make a recommendation on whether a precinct would be justified for that site. I do support rezoning 200, the site to the south open space zone, given that it does form part of the golf course activity, although it's slightly separate. But I maintain that a master plan or further detail on what is actually sought for that site would be necessary to understand whether a precinct is justified. Moving through to paragraph 24, Sarah Chambers has raised a number of issues in her statement across quite a wide range of matters. I have reviewed those and in my view I have addressed those matters generally within the section 42A report. Nearly there. Paragraph 25, the surveying company HB Limited, there are a range of amendments there sought to rezoning across a number of areas, but the statement does seem to focus in on the zoning around Miani and they're seeking that a settlement zone apply. And I do acknowledge that that area has been developed for rural residential type activities. However, I do maintain that a settlement zone would not give effect to the relevant RPS direction, given the increased level of development that would be enabled. Moving through to paragraph 26, the submissions of the Vigor Brown Group. I do maintain my recommendations for that block, which are contained in the 42A report. That did seek to extend the general residential zone in that area to align with the recommendations of Ms Lincoln on the heritage provisions in that area. I don't recommend a further rezoning of the wider block on the basis of the information that I have reviewed, although I do acknowledge the questions from the panel around whether a medium density residential zone in that block would be appropriate and provide a transition down. That's certainly an option and I do see the merit in that, and if it would assist the panel I would be happy to provide some further information on the differences in capacity that would be enabled. My view is it's probably going to be quite limited in terms of the differences in capacity, which would make potentially that change from high to medium density a viable option to consider.
Just in terms of that, I'd certainly appreciate that information, but also if further numbers, if it was GRZ as well.
Yep, okay. Yes, certainly can do that.
GRZ, MRZ and HRZ, what the difference would be.
Yes.
And what effect that would have on housing capacity demand, those figures you outlined earlier.
Yes, we can certainly do that. And then paragraph 27, the evidence of Woolworths New Zealand Limited. This is seeking to expand the local centre zone to the site at 1 Durham Street. So no technical evidence has been provided in support of that request, which does limit my ability to form a recommendation on that zoning and understand its potential effects. And I do have some concerns about whether the submission provides scope for the requested change. The submission is quite broadly cast and talks about increasing the size of local centre zones generally. So there is a question around whether the neighbouring sites would have a reasonable understanding that that meant the specific change which is now sought to the site at 1 Durham Street. But having said that, I do at a strategic level acknowledge that the site could be an efficient location to expand the Tamatea local centre in the future, particularly in the context of there being otherwise quite limited opportunities to meaningfully expand existing centres within the existing urban environment. And then I have provided responses to all the panel questions. I can go through those if you like, or can take those as read.
I'm happy for them to be taken as read.
Yeah, okay, yep. We'll take them as read.
Okay,
Thank you,
all right,
Morgan.
great, thank you. And then just now moving to briefly the updated further opening statement comments that I provided, circulated last night. And this just provides an update on the further discussions that happened last week with a number of submitters.
Okay, just before you do,
Yes.
maybe one matter that I did wish to raise some questions is the southern end of Marine Parade, the zoning of that as general residential.
Yes.
Now, you've responded to our questions helpfully by saying it's not just a transition, the height, it's not a question just the height limit being a transition from medium density down to the coastal environment. It's an accessibility question as well. Could you just expand on that,
Yes,
if you don't mind?
certainly. And I wonder, it might be helpful to pull up the map as well,
Yeah.
Fleur.
Put it up on my screen.
So the accessibility analysis, there's a summary map which I could refer you to. It's in Appendix 2 of the high-level structure plans. And what that does show is the most accessible areas within and around the city centre are really on the northwestern side or the northern side of Kennedy Road, if we can. I know it's not helpful that the maps are behind you.
That's all right, down in front.
Oh, you've got them in front. Okay. So, essentially where the high-density residential zone is proposed is where the accessibility analysis shows as the most accessible area with access to public transport, open spaces, schools, employment in the city centre and that sort of thing. So the area on the southern, down the south there, Fleur, on Marine Parade,
Southern end, yep.
that it's not to say that that area is not accessible.
Yeah.
It's really just at the southern extent, if you like, of the most accessible parts of the city. So the Napier spatial picture and the high-level structure plans really use the termination point of that open space at the southern end of Warren Street that you can see there as that transition from medium density through to general residential, moving further south. But I do acknowledge that there is medium density on the western side, and it's really a matter of choosing a logical boundary more than anything.
I asked that mainly because from a market demand kind of perspective, I would have thought that would have been an area of a market demand for a higher level of density along there. And in terms of accessibility, I acknowledge that the bus route is on the other side of the railway line, and there's not much option to get across. But you know, in terms of accessibility otherwise to the city centre and things, it's fairly comparable to what's happening across the railway line there.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, because of the size of Napier, there's no areas that aren't in the city that aren't accessible. It's really it's really more of a relative measure. But if it would assist, we could seek some further advice as part of the further capacity analysis for the Vigor Brown submission. We could get some further advice on that demand, policy 5 demand factor for this area as well, if that would assist. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
And just in terms of that, just from my perspective, the little pocket of GRZ at the end of Todd Street, to me, doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense in terms of the overall zoning, given it's surrounded by medium density. And in terms of that sliver going down Marine Parade, again, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There's a lot of two-storeyed development along Marine Parade. There's a high level of intensification going on. A lot of the old houses are currently being bowled and rebuilt into two-storeyed, and there's a number of three-storey buildings along Marine Parade already, residential buildings.
Yeah.
So that sliver of GRZ to me isn't making a heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so in terms of your reply report, I'd certainly like you to consider, again, a little bit at the end of Todd Street and the sliver down Marine Parade that's bounded to the west by MRZ.
That area further north, if you want to just zoom in on that, just to give you, I am recommending that area is rezoned to MRZ.
So that one's, okay.
Yeah, that's mainly, that was, there was a heritage advocacy area that applied under the operative district plan, which flowed through to the spatial picture, but it was really a timing matter more than anything. But yeah, so we're really talking about the area on Marine Parade. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's that sliver of GRZ until it hits the wider GRZ area. So I'm not worried about the wider GRZ area at the bottom of the screen. It's just that finger.
That finger
coming out.
along Marine Parade.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So.
Okay, we'll do some further work on that.
Yeah. And which submitter addresses that sliver?
It's the surveying company, and I think they are presenting today.
Yeah.
Right, so to go back to the further discussions that have been happening with submitters. So we've been talking with the representatives for Mana Ahuriri Trust around the potential rezoning of the sites on Hospital Hill. So I'll perhaps firstly talk to those. We met, myself and Ms Lincoln met with the planners for Mana Ahuriri Trust on Friday last week, and we did discuss potential amendments that build on the recommended provisions contained in the evidence of Matthew Holder. So in that evidence, he requested retaining the general residential zone, but applying a site-specific rule that would allow buildings up to 12 metres. So essentially just tweaking that building height standard which applies. I broadly agree with that approach. I think that does provide certainty that an increased level of density could be achieved on the site, but also enables that integration with the character and amenity values of the surrounding area by applying the slightly lower building coverage standards, slightly higher landscape area standards, and the lower height in relation to boundary standards, which would apply at the boundaries of the site. So in my view, that achieves an appropriate balance between the outcomes sought. I have proposed achieving that through a height control area, or what I've called a Auckland Road height restriction control area, and then a Hospital Hill height restriction control area, and that's set out in Appendix A to the further opening comments that I circulated. So I have provided these markups to Mr Holder. I understand that he's considering them at the moment, and hopefully we have an opportunity to discuss them further. I think he's presenting tomorrow. And I'd be happy to meet with him and talk with him again through that and issue a joint witness statement with him if that would assist
I think that
the panel.
would be helpful. We've instructed some joint witness statements yesterday for hearing stream 5 for matters where there's a close level of apparent agreement, and it would be good to formalise that level of agreement or disagreement
Yes,
as much as we can. Yeah, thank you.
certainly. Yes, we can certainly do that.
Can I just, I don't know if this is appropriate time to ask you, the Mataruahau amenity precinct, the question of whether that should apply to the Hospital Hill sites, is there some sort of level of agreement with Mr Holder around the retention of that to these sites? It does seem like an anomaly if you're, in terms of the character of the hill.
We didn't, I think it's fair to say we didn't discuss that matter in detail when we met. We were really focused on these height restriction control areas.
Yeah.
But I would be very keen to hear from Mr Holder
We'll be
on that
asking
point.
him, because it's kind of like, while you can increase the height limit, and it's not a significant increase in height from a residential perspective, but in terms of any sort of future consenting process, whether there's sufficient explanation and policy support for a sort of more intensive development in the area in terms of the character of Mataruahau. So I would appreciate it if you could just have a look at that as well, in
Certainly.
terms of the joint witness.
Yes, certainly. We have proposed, and I was conscious of that matter because there are density standards that apply in that precinct as well, which are quite restrictive, and I wouldn't want to set up a situation where there's
Set up to
conflict
fail,
between...
under that precinct, yeah.
So there might be, and this is one thing we did talk to Mr Holder about, was perhaps excluding that 500 square metre density standard from this site. But we're still working through that. But in terms of the policy support, I have proposed in Appendix A a new description in the introduction, which specifically identifies that additional height and density is provided for on the sites, provided that it positively responds to the character. And then I've also proposed amendments to Policy 2, which again talks about providing for generally medium density development on the former hospital sites, recognising their potential to deliver quality comprehensive development. But yes, I can certainly look through that again and just make sure that there aren't any fish hooks in there.
Okay, thank you.
Just in terms of that, if you read Mr Gardner Hopkins' legal representations?
I haven't actually. I've read all of the planning and technical evidence, but I haven't quite got to the legal submissions. No.
Yeah, they're representations because they're not strictly legal submissions.
Sorry. Yes.
Giving the status of Mr Gardner Hopkins
Yes.
currently. But if you could do that on page 5 of his representations, he has quite useful diagrams of the hospital sites. And they outline the relief sought in terms of high density residential and medium density residential for the former nurses' home and the former maternity ward. And so what I'm needing to understand from you is what are the advantages of the precinct approach as opposed to just a straight outright use of MRZ and HRZ as proposed in the representations, which seems to me a simpler approach.
And I guess the key question there will be the extent to which consideration of that surrounding context would be enabled with that change of zoning, and whether that's necessary and appropriate. As I understood from Mr Holder, his position is that, or as it's set out in his evidence, is that an additional height standard within while maintaining that general residential zone is a feasible solution. But yep, I can certainly look at that.
Yeah, I mean that's Mr Holder's planning view, which is obviously interesting and important, but the representations from Mr Gardner Hopkins in some way represent the client's aspirations. He's an advocate, whereas Mr Holder has to be an evaluative witness. So in terms of the advocacy of Mana Aharere, I give more weight to Mr Gardiner-Hopkins' representation. So I'd certainly appreciate you thinking some more about the pros and cons of the precinct approach versus a straight-out MRZ, HRZ.
I can certainly do that, yeah.
And it's on it's page 4 of the representation, sorry, not page 5.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right, now moving down to the Ahuriri General Industrial Zone, if you wanted to move to that area, Fleur. So perhaps just to give a little bit of context, the Tim Sandel and Alicia McKinnon, who are submitters and are, I think, presenting later today, live close by to the proposed general industrial zone and have concerns about the zoning proposed in this area, as well as the types of activities that have occurred on the site historically, and you'll hear from them no doubt on that later today. So I have met with both Tim and Alicia, as well as representatives for the fuel companies on the 13th of June. Ms Lincoln and myself did have an earlier meeting with Tim Sandel and Alicia McKinnon, I think it was the week before, wasn't it, or a couple of weeks before, just to talk through their concerns and issues. And I have attached at Appendix B a copy of the memo that we talked through at the meeting on Friday last week, just with a few slight modifications to include, to remove some internal commentary. So that memo really just sets out the key issues, and it sets out some of the options that could be considered. And that's really responding to the relief sought in the Napier City Council submission, which sought to introduce a precinct over this area, which would further limit the types of industrial activities that could occur within the general industrial zone, broadly to align those to the types of industrial activities that are enabled in the mixed-use zone as notified and as currently proposed. So as I understand it, following the discussion on Friday, there is broad agreement that a precinct approach could be appropriate for the area that's shown in Figure 4 of the memo at Attachment B, Annex B, with the purpose of the precinct being to include the more restrictive activity status for some industrial activities. And there are some activities which are more concerning than others, like the storage of tyres, transport depot and storage of shipping containers. And I understand that reflects some of the activities that have historically occurred on the site and the transport and noise effects related to that. And these types of amendments recognise the sensitivity of the neighbouring residential sites and the need to carefully manage potential adverse effects on residential amenity values, given their very close proximity. Sorry, yes?
So I don't know if this is appropriate at the moment. So the precinct, how would it manage those activities? What's the proposal there?
So what it could potentially do is provide some more restrictive activity status for some particular industrial activities which are enabled in the general industrial zone. So that includes the storage of tyres and storage of shipping containers is a good example. Those two activities are permitted in the general industrial zone. So there could potentially be a more restrictive activity status for those activities within this particular area, which would require those to go through a consenting process.
But existing activities would have existing use rights?
They would, yes. This would be for any new activities. And as I understand it from the fuel companies, there are parts of the site which are not necessarily needed for fuel storage, and they do from time to time lease out parts of the site for different activities to occur. So it's really focused on the potential for that to occur.
Some of the issues that were raised, and we'll hear from the Sandels later today, And we are intending to do a site visit at the end of today, unaccompanied by any submitter. Some of the issues seem to relate more to things like noise and light issues, which are not necessarily a zoning or use activity per se. Was any discussion held around sort of those controls in the district plan?
Yes, the memo, if I can refer you to that,
Yep.
what we did do was provide a comparison of the, if you refer,
To
page numbering's wrong.
It's got a page numbering. It's after page 6. Is that
It
the
says
one?
it's 1. Yes, it's after page 7. So that provides a comparison of the noise, transport and lighting standards that apply under the PDP and the operative district plan. And there are some really important differences there, which we explained at the meeting, particularly in relation to noise and the need to ensure that at the residential zone boundaries, those residential zone noise standards are met, which is a key difference. And then also with respect to transport, and depending on where this lands, I'm not quite sure, the requirement for a traffic assessment for activities that generate over a certain volume of vehicle movements per day. And again, that's another change from the operative district plan. So I do acknowledge that those standards are a key method for managing the effects of different types of industrial activities on the site. So if there were a particularly noisy activity that sought to establish, then it would probably require consent under those rules. This proposal to regulate the activities as well, such as the storage of tyres, for example, and storage of shipping containers, does manage those other visual residential amenity effects. The storage of shipping containers is a good example of that. So there might be some effects that aren't managed by the noise and lighting. Yeah.
Was there any indication that the activities to date on the site historically have been non-compliant with? Was there any information on that matter?
Ms. Lincoln may be able to assist me there.
Yes, so I believe there's a transport depot has been established on the site as a leasee of the site. There was some determination from our consent team on whether that was a lawful activity because transport depots are discretionary activities within the mixed-use zone. It was really down to the definition of transport depot relating to the overnight stay of vehicles, which meant that it was no longer considered a transport depot, which meant it was a compliant activity, I believe. So my understanding is that they are compliant on the site, but that hasn't resolved the concerns of the neighbours.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lincoln.
Just in terms of your figure 4, does Georgina McPherson represent all the landowners within your green precinct, including those on Coronation Street and Tangaroa Street?
I think that question would be best put to Ms. McPherson. I understand that she does, but I think it would be best for her to clarify that.
What's the purpose of the precinct over those lots bordering Coronation Street and Tangaroa Street, which have large existing buildings on them?
It would, the precinct would essentially apply to all of those activities that are within the general industrial zone, excluding the Kiwi Rail land on the northern side.
That wasn't my question though. So the lots facing Coronation Street and Tangaroa Street have existing large buildings on them, so it's unlikely they're going to be used for storing containers or tyres or trucks. So the question is, why would the precinct need to cover those lots?
Yeah, those ones there. That's something I can certainly look at. A precinct would provide some guidance if those sites were ever redeveloped, but the likelihood of them being redeveloped is perhaps a question.
It's perhaps somewhere between 0 and 0.
Yes, so I can certainly look at that.
Sorry, go on. I'm just wary of extending. I mean, this is a general industrial zone. and activities are permitted in there. It's a long-standing industrial zone. It's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
And so I'm just, I'd be keen to ensure that any constraints placed on the use of that zone are targeted and don't affect lots that don't need to be targeted.
Yep.
And a question from me is, where would the precinct sit in terms of the district plan? Would it be for the general industrial zone or under, because well, in terms of the rezoning proposals, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, I can't find it, where the areas of GIZ would be extended to here. Can you, on this map?
Oh, it would just be the site
That's
there,
fine,
which
yeah,
you can
okay.
see. Yes, so
Okay.
that mixed-use zone does currently cut through
Yeah.
the existing, I understand it, the office building or,
Okay.
administration building. So that's the area that I'm recommending rezoning to GIZ.
Yeah.
And it would sit under the GIZ, the precinct
Yes,
division.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, based on that, there's still I do believe that there's some merit in some further discussions with the submitters.
And all affected landowners within the area of your proposed precinct. Ms McPherson doesn't represent all of the landowners, then this would need to be discussed with them in terms of natural justice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, my understanding is that she does, but again, that needs
Yeah.
to be clarified.
Yeah, well, maybe you could send her an email when you've finished addressing us and just...
Yeah, certainly. Some further discussion, but we have certainly involved all of the relevant submitters on the zoning in the discussions that we've been having. And I think there would be value in continuing those discussions if that's, if the panel would like that. And we could issue a joint memorandum or something to that effect,
Yeah.
documenting where things land.
Yeah, I mean, discussions with submitters, it's good and helpful, but of course the affected landowners are necessarily part of that discussion,
Yes.
because they're the ones who are actually most affected by any changes that you're proposing.
Okay. And then finally, no, not finally, second to last, Gordon Sanson. So this relates to the zoning of the sites at 336, 338 and 340 Miani Road. You're bringing it up, great. And I have had some email correspondence with Mr. O'Shaughnessy, who's representing the submitter.
Yeah.
And I did circulate some draft provisions to him yesterday, which I understand that he's considering and will potentially talk to when he presents. And I included those draft provisions at Appendix C. So in summary, I do recommend retaining the rural production zone for the sites, but including a Miani Road specific control area, which provides for a narrow range of commercial and visitor accommodation activities, largely to reflect what's already on the site at the moment, but provides a pathway should any modest minor extensions or redevelopment be proposed. From my review or view of this area, it's really functioning as a small rural service centre. There's a hotel there, which and all of the activities have been long established on those sites. There's a small store and some other commercial activities, which, in my view, could be appropriately provided for through some provisions in the district plan. Otherwise, it would face a reasonably uncertain or challenging consenting pathway under the rural production zone, particularly given the site is identified as LUC2, I understand.
Is that the principal reason why you're not recommending it be turned to settlement zone?
Yes, and the settlement zone would enable a range of other activities which would enable intensification beyond what's currently there. Residential would be an example of that. Really, what what I'm attempting to do here is provide for those existing commercial activities and enable them to continue operating and expanding in a modest way if that's needed, but not extending that out to residential or other potential activities, which would, I think, have some challenges in terms of the RPS, quite directive RPS direction.
It just seems to me, I'm not totally familiar with this area, but the hotel and things in particular, they're normally the sort of the heart of, for better or worse, many settlements, and you kind of might almost expect that to be part of the settlement zone as well. And the idea of allowing some sort of further development, because it's a fairly confined site. I mean, it's a large site, but not huge. And certainly not being used for rural production at the moment, as far as I can see.
No.
Because the opposite way would be to rezone it to settlement and then put a precinct controls over it as per Jervis Town. And to put those sort of levels of control on it that way rather than through the RPZ. Or is it RPROS, isn't it? So that had occurred to me when I was reading through your report and the submitters. So is that a thought being given, sort of the opposite, rezoning a settlement and then putting some controls over it to not necessarily encourage or enable intensification too far?
Right. Yes, that could potentially be another option which I can consider further and come back to you on.
Okay.
Again, I'll just need to look very carefully at the RPS policy direction for this area, and also the requirements of the MPS HPL and whether that constrains or informs what could potentially be achieved on the site.
Okay, thank you.
Remind us what the LUC is?
LUC2.
Right.
Yeah.
So, just looking at your Appendix C, and in terms of the wording in red for RPROS 21, the SCA for this area, I just had some queries at this stage about your recommended matters of discretion. Matter of discretion C, ecological, aquatic and natural values. Fail to see the relevance of that. Cultural, ecological and aquatic values, just wondering how that can be relevant to the site. H, setback distances from the Ahuriri estuary.
Yeah.
It's a long way from the estuary. Any watercourse or open drain, I don't think there are any. And then K, the effects on the maintenance, use and development of a watercourse or open drain, I don't think there are any. So I'm not sure where you got these things from.
I've just carried them through from all the other rule infringements, but
You need to give them
certainly
some more thought.
we'll go through. I'll go through that again.
They need to be targeted to the site.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, okay.
And finally, just in terms of Marist Holdings Green Meadows Limited and the Mission Estate provisions, which Ms Lincoln is taking us to. So I met with representatives from that submitter on the 19th of May and the 13th of June, and those were very constructive and productive discussions with the team. And at those meetings, we did discuss and broadly agree to a range of amendments to the Mission Visitor Landscape Precinct, the Mission Church Road Residential Precinct, and the Mission Development Area as they were proposed in the MHGL submission. So Mr Mackay, who's the planner for the submitter, circulated further amendments at the close of business yesterday. I haven't had a chance to look at those in detail yet, but I understand that they do address the further matters that we discussed last Friday, and I just really want the opportunity to have a discussion with Mr Bradshaw and Ms Lincoln about those before confirming my position. But I'll certainly be happy to meet with Mr Mackay again to work through those amendments, again the outcome of which could be recorded in a joint witness statement if that would assist.
Yes, that would assist. So if you could, that'd be great. Thanks.
happy to take any further questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I guess I just have a general question, and it's in regards to all the proposed rezoning changes that have come through. So the precinct changes, the increased height limits, the intensification areas, and the ranges, including the expansion of the visitor accommodation. Does that result in increased infrastructure demand? And if so, has that kind of been assessed against INF 01 and P2?
So in all of the discussions around rezoning, we have been having very detailed discussions with Mr Bradshaw and Mr Curson, who is the council's traffic engineer. And in all of those instances, it's generally recorded throughout the Section 42 report as to whether that rezoning would create any issues from an infrastructure capacity point of view. My understanding is that none of the rezonings would create any infrastructure capacity issues, but can certainly answer any questions if there are concerns around particular sites or areas.
So that includes all of the changes made since the 42 report and today's
Correct.
evidence?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was just looking at Street View, and in terms of going back to the whole Battery Road issue, there are quite a number of commercial premises on Coronation Street and Tangaroa Street that would be caught up in that precinct, which, I mean, they may be Tangaroa Seafoods, for instance, Impact Pro Wrestling. You know, so it would be good. We'll hear from Ms McPherson tomorrow afternoon, so we can ask her directly, but it would be good to know who the landowners and land users are in that precinct, to be sure that they match in terms of her representation. Thank you. Any further questions?
No, that's good.
No, I don't have any further questions. So thank you very much. There's a little bit more homework there to do.
Yes.
And we'll hear no doubt from some of the submitters which may have implications for your recommendations. You're fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you. Our first submitter for the hearing today, Ms. Fordyce, sorry. You're more than welcome. Yep, take the submitter's table. Yeah.
Is the microphone on? Do you need that?
No, it's all under control, isn't it? Yes, it's all under control. We've been assured, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And so I've got your submission in front of me here, so thank you very much for that. And I just to let you know that I knew Lance Leakers fairly well, so I've been to that house several times before we passed.
Perfect.
So yeah, so thank you. So I'm more than welcome to talk to your submission.
Okay. I've written a few notes. My submission is probably quite simple relative to some that you might be receiving. So thank you for the time and opportunity for me to speak. I made the submission on behalf of myself and my husband and others on our street, our crescent. I haven't made a submission to the council or anyone before, but after receiving that public notification letter of the proposed district plan, I felt very strongly about acting and also mobilising our street. I'm an ordinary working person living in ordinary suburban street. I've lived there for 12 years, so I'm the second person in that house after Lance Leakers. As you'll be aware, our submission is the specific concern relating to that introduction of the area for intensification, which includes our crescent being proposed as medium density residential. I want to reinforce the special character of our relatively small residential street or crescent, which runs between the much wider and busier Avondale Road and Gloucester Street. And I wanted to ask, are people familiar? I can hear that obviously one of you is quite familiar. Our whole crescent can at times be busy, especially around that school drop-off, pick-up, working hours, and by location and design is also used as a through road. However, the Gloucester Street end is already especially busy. with multiple people parking there through the day. Staff, clients, patients and school families. You've got the very busy Taradale Veterinary Hospital on the corner, the busier Greendale Family Health Centre just around the corner but adjacent to the vet practice, and the bustling Green Meadows Primary School just around the other corner. Our crescent is not wide, it's curved at both ends, and the Gloucester Street end is already highly congested and has got more so, with an accident waiting to happen many times through the day, with cars parked on both sides through the day. Any increased housing intensification would further increase congestion, and this is a big concern for our street. I live near the Gloucester Street end. I've spent 7 years walking kids up and back to the school. Our families enrolled at the health centre and our pets are clients at the vet hospital. So I know this immediate area very well. Because Upper Crescent was developed in the late 1960s and 1970s, as I understand it, there are many older houses and with many having bigger section sizes. While having the opportunity to subdivide is already obviously available, there is great concern that with the proposed changes there would be no density control or minimum lot size. That is, if development is sought, as you people will know, at the same time as subdivision, putting more than one house on a site will not need neighbours' approval if standards are met. And additionally, dwellings can be built up to 12 metres, allowing for those 3 stories. This is highly concerning for us. There is no allowance for loss of privacy, loss of sunlight, loss of our neighbourhood character, and with the increased congestion as previously stated. We understand that demands being placed on planning for housing, but feel that we're being penalised for living and choosing to buy in our good location and neighbourhood. We all feel that these property changes would also significantly devalue current property values. Myself and the 31 others that have been included with my submission, I didn't have the time to repeatedly door knock on every dwelling, believe that none of the proposed changes are of any benefit to those living and owning their property in our crescent. We believe strongly that it would be unfair to impose those changes, and due to the reasons explained, Upper Crescent should not be included in this medium density proposal. We ask that you consider carefully this specific request and consider the massive impact, if this plan is implemented, it would have on our relatively small, narrow, curved at both ends, lovely crescent.
Thank you for that. And just to clarify for my benefit, if you don't mind, so the relief you're seeking, as they say, is to or have the zoning general residential for the whole of the street?
Yeah, that's what it is currently, isn't it?
Under the
Yep.
ODP, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Any questions for Ms Fordyce?
No, that's clear.
No, that was very clear. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah. The hearing will now break for morning tea and will resume at 11 a.m. When Ms McFlynn will reappear on behalf of the Dooney Brothers Partnership. So thank you very much. Hearing stream 6 is reconvening after morning break. Our submitters to be heard are the Dooney brothers and Ms McFlynn. Welcome again.
Thank you.
We have seen your evidence, of course, and you talked to it yesterday as a sort of combined evidence that you gave. But in terms of specifically the rezoning issue for that's before us now, would you like to introduce people at the table to the hearing?
So I am joined by David,
Yep.
Brenda, and Terry,
Oh, well,
all Dooneys, representing the Dooney Brothers Partnership.
thank you. And I've just got a map that was in the Section 42A report up in front of me, so I
Yep.
can be aware of where it is.
Excellent.
So over to you.
Thank you. So I'll start from paragraph 6 of my evidence. The Dooney Brothers Partnership requests the rezoning of their properties at 35, 45, 49 and 55 The Loop and 69 Waverley Road from rural production to rural lifestyle zone. While the reporting officer has recommended rejecting the request based on the National Policy Statement for highly productive land, we consider this site to be an appropriate location for rural lifestyle development and submit that the current policy framework should be applied with pragmatism and in recognition of evolving local circumstances. The following is a brief summary of the Dooney family's land use history for the block, which has been provided by the family, and outlining the site's past uses and associated challenges, and highlighting the limited productive capacity of the land. The 50-acre Dooney block has until recently been farmed as an apple orchard. This was set up in the early 1980s but was discontinued due to the economics of cost versus income, meaning running at a loss. In 2025, 25 hectares is the minimum size unit for a small operator to be viable according to MPI. This would be with the new style intensive planting, i.e. more trees per hectare. To set this up on the Dooney land is just not feasible. The cost of development would far outweigh any potential income from such a small block, and taking the normal running costs of an orchard, there is no way that you could ever make a profit from this land. The area surrounding the block has a lot of infill housing, particularly on the eastern boundary along Loop Road. This limits agricultural and horticultural use due to the constraints of having people reside close to your boundary. Complaints about noise, e.g. during harvesting operation, dust when tilling the paddocks, spray concerns when applying chemicals for pest and disease control are just some examples of what problems would arise. Livestock farming on such a small block is also not viable. To spell paddocks for rotational grazing would mean numbers of stock farmed would be insufficient to make a reasonable income. Also, due to the proximity of the city boundary, stock safety would be of huge concern. While overwintering sheep for a local farmer while the orchard was in production, they suffered large losses due to dog attacks. In one example, 50 sheep had to be euthanised in one night's attack. The injuries were horrific. The farmer decided that this grazing was no longer required. The property is currently leased for cropping, but at 40,000 plus GST per annum, it works out at only 2,000 per hectare, and from that you have to pay rates and tax on income, and it's hardly a sustainable income. The regional policy statement was developed using population projections from the 2010 Heritonga Plains Urban Development Strategy. More recent analysis prepared to support the future development strategy has confirmed a significant increase in projected housing demand, including for rural housing, since 2010. These reports recommend planning for an 80-20 urban to rural growth split. Based on this ratio, approximately 1,460 additional rural dwellings are needed in Napier alone, yet the current plan-enabled capacity is estimated at only 280 dwellings. This substantial shortfall demonstrates the need to provide for additional rural lifestyle development in suitable locations. The plan-enabled capacity also assumes that a dwelling will be able to be established on every existing vacant rural title. Should the recommendation to introduce a restriction on new dwellings on highly productive land be adopted, this will further reduce the existing plan-enabled development capacity, thereby further increasing the need for additional rural lifestyle sites. The Dooney land is ideally located for such development. The surrounding area already comprises a mix of rural production, urban and peri-urban activities. It's not a large consolidated rural block, but rather lies at the interface of diverse land uses. Rezoning the site will not create ad hoc fragmentation of rural production land, but will allow more efficient use of a site that is no longer economically viable for farming. The land's productive potential has been constrained by its proximity to residential neighbours, resulting in reverse sensitivity issues, including complaints about noise, spray and dust. The property has also experienced livestock losses due to dog attacks, evidencing the challenges of continuing primary production in this location. Although the land does contain LUC and LUC2 and LUC3 soils, it's important to also note the majority of the site is LUC3. Central Government has signalled its intention to amend the NPS-HPL to remove LUC land from the definition of highly productive land, and this process is underway. The district plan review should therefore consider the timing of decision making to ensure that appropriate regard can be given to evolving national direction. The reporting officer refers to rural residential areas in Napier as being confined to the hills surrounding Taradale, Pariety and Bayview, which are considered unsuitable for production. However, rural lifestyle development has occurred in various settings, including flatter areas of Bayview. Applying the policy framework rigidly risks inconsistent decision-making and missed opportunities to enable growth where logical and supported by local context. The proposed rezoning aligns with Objective UD4 of the Regional Policy Statement, which seeks to enable rural development in the Heretaunga Plains sub-region in an integrated and planned manner, while avoiding inappropriate lifestyle development. Notably, the RPS does not provide specific guidance on what constitutes inappropriate lifestyle development. However, the intent is clearly to prevent fragmented, unplanned sprawl that undermines strategic land use patterns, circumstances that do not apply here. The rezoning would provide for rural lifestyle living consistent with the existing land use pattern and demonstrated demand. It also aligns with Policy UD3, which requires district plans to avoid ad hoc residential development and carefully manage lifestyle development to avoid compromising the productive potential of the Heretaunga Plains. In this case, the site's productive potential is already limited, and the proposal represents a considered and appropriate response to local and regional objectives. In summary, rezoning this land to rural lifestyle zone represents a strategic response to changing housing needs, land use realities, and the economic viability of farming on small peri-urban sites. It reflects the actual character of the area and allows for more efficient land use. We therefore request that land be rezoned to rural lifestyle zone.
Thank you. Are you open to questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. I'll turn to the panel shortly, but I just looked at the Regional Council's LUC mapping, which, as you say, does cover the majority of that site, or sites. Are there any particular constraints on the LUC soils there? Do you know? Are there any particular, because often they'll identify constraints like water or drainage issues and things like that.
Not on the maps themselves, but on the ground there definitely are.
Okay.
Would someone like to talk
Are there
to that?
particular constraints on using that land for, say, horticulture? Other than size?
Yeah, my hearing is not the best, but as far as the ground goes, it is quite heavy. Trees in there just are not thrifty like they should. Yeah, I couldn't quite catch your question, but I guess you're asking about waterlogging of the ground at that time.
Well, yeah, is there any waterlogging and things given the low level of the land and the...
It has, in the past, it has been field tiled, which has helped a lot. But if you get a bad wet winter through wet spring, the trees, if they have wet rooting system as opposed to water coming down and working its way up, the water stays in there. The roots get what they call phytophthora, and it eventually will kill the trees off. So, and the plantings that were in there that were pulled out were inefficient by the old style. You probably see the odd ones around there, but they're all mainly going for the espalier system, where the close planting and narrow roads, and which are really designed for mechanical harvesting. So we just can't afford to do that. It's horrendous. Something like, off the top of my head, it's about 280,000 establishment per hectare.
Yeah.
Maybe if we were 40 years younger, you could look at.
Are there any distinguishing characteristics of the land from other areas around that vicinity in terms of, the LUC 3 and that, in terms of, is it distinguished from other sites around that area in terms of its capacity to grow?
I think through there for us, it's, well, I think it's fair to say the ground through there is a little bit lower than what it would be in other areas, correct, Terry?
Yeah, it does come down, and as you go across Riverbean Road, it comes back up again.
Yeah. It's kind of a, I suppose, simple way of looking at it is like a dish throughout.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the panel?
Thank you very much for your submission. Something I did want to give you an opportunity to address is I understand you made a similar submission to the FDS, and I'm not familiar with where that process landed. Are you able to update us? Because there is a bit of an intersect around sort of development opportunities there.
Yeah. It's a little bit uncertain about what the FDS is going to look like for this area. The panel that made recommendations back to the councils suggested that the land to the north be included, and noted that that wouldn't be a hard boundary, because they'd probably, if they were to develop that, need to extend beyond for stormwater management at the very least, and possibly need to provide some additional housing capacity as well. But I understand that went back to the two councils and, oh no, it hasn't gone back to the two councils yet, sorry. It's gone back to the Future Development Committee, and they recommended that that area be taken out. So it's still got to go back to the councils, and so we're not sure whether that area is going to be included or not.
I understand. So could you just clarify, you said there's a portion of potentially this request for stormwater attenuation, is that correct?
Well, we haven't actually seen any detail of the development that's been planned, but it's for the north of the cross-country drain. They are trying to get consent for residential development there, and we understand that in order to be able to do that, they need to put the stormwater to the south of the drain, but not entirely sure how much area or where that would be.
Great, thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you.
No questions.
No questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very helpful. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, and this is the last time that you'll see me, so thank you very much for...
Oh, really? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Mr. Chan, would you like to come to the table? Welcome again
Thank you.
for your third appearance.
Number three, yes.
Yes.
And the last, I hope.
Thank you very much. Well, we've read your recirculated statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Much of what I've included in our submissions, you will already have heard or read in previous stream 1 and 4. So I'll just highlight a number of points. You'll know that we are seeking the rezoning of an area that we call the protected area, which is really an overlap of the two diagrams and attachments 1 and 2 of the submissions. Attachment 1 is what we call the Vigor-Brown area, which we've said should have a heritage overlay, some of which was accepted by the council in the Section 42A report on heritage overlay. And then over the page, of course, it appears that any heritage overlay area will have an underlying zoning of general residential. That seems to be accepted by the council. But we say the general residential should be extended to the larger block shown on diagram 2, which is bounded by Georges Drive, Carnell Street, Joel Street and Kennedy Road. Now, we say there is insufficient evidence to justify high-density housing in what we call a protected area. I won't go into the technical legal argument that I put in hearing stream 4 about the proper interpretation of the national policy statement. Put that to one side. So I'm dealing now with whether it's actually justified in the protected area. Now, the council, we say, concedes in its own documents that high-density housing is not justified. I refer to the council's experts, Elizabeth Pashif and Anne Galloway, and their expert evidence submitted for hearing stream 1, where they basically said HRZ permits buildings of a height and scale not currently existing in Napier and will be very disruptive in proximity to a heritage zone, and they recommend medium density. And also the Napier City Council's own urban design team submitted in their further submission, number 524, that the height limit of 19.5 metres in the high-density zoning rules was too high. And in paragraph 19, I set out the relevant passage from the Council's urban design team. The objective of this further submission is to ensure that the design outcomes of Napier align with our city's intended character over the next 10 years, and to facilitate a cohesive transition toward medium-density development in suitable locations. The further submission aims to reinforce high-quality design standards, fostering an attractive urban landscape, both within sites and across neighbourhoods. It is noted that the extent of proposed medium-density development is ambitious, and as such, it is advocated that caution be exercised when considering medium-density development. It is recommended that this be undertaken in areas close to the city centre, i.e. built form reflects and supports the increase in height, scale and density. Now, there are 4 really important points about this from the Council's own submission. First, it rejects the excess of 19.5 metre height of high-density housing. Second, even with medium-density development, the Council accepts that there must be a cohesive transition in suitable locations and an attractive urban landscape must be fostered. Third, the extent of the proposed medium-density development is ambitious, which indicates that the proposed high-density development is over-ambitious, inappropriate for Napier, and unjustified. And fourth, any high-density development should be undertaken in areas close to the city centre, where the built form reflects and supports the increase in height, scale and density. Now, the Council says this in relation to medium density, and therefore it must apply with even greater force to the high density areas. So it's necessary, we submit, to consider the built form of the protected area to see whether it supports the increase in height, scale and density of high density. Now, the vast majority of buildings in the protected area are the original buildings. That is, single-storey residential homes built before 1940. And I've set this out in the three tables. 95.5% are single story, 4.5% are 2 stories, and there is nothing above 2 stories. 82.9% were built pre-1940, and a lot of those were built pre-1930 as well. 17.1% built after 1940, and I should point out that most of those are small flats, and residential is 95.5%. Now, the council accepts that a significant proportion, nearly 30%, of the buildings in the protected area have heritage value that must be protected. So, in looking at the built form of this protected area, how can it be shown that it reflects and supports the increase in height, scale and density of high-density buildings or even medium-density buildings? In fact, we don't think they've even considered the built form of the protected area at all. They've just looked at accessibility and said, we're going to stick 6-story apartments there. On page 7, paragraph 25, I've set out a typical streetscape of the protected area, original villas, bungalows, pre-1920. And the only 6-story apartment block that we know of in Napier, which is the McLean Tower. And we say it cannot possibly be said that the current built form of the protected area in any way supports buildings the height of McLean Tower. And it's telling that there's only one in the whole of Napier. Now, the Section 42A report also says that the height to boundary rules would protect the character of the heritage overlay area, because a building in the HRZ would have to comply with the GRZ height to boundary rules. But we say those rules are completely insufficient to preserve the character of the protected area. And I've shown this in paragraph 30. Picture of, again, McLean Tower, the only 6-story apartment building we know of in the city. Beside the typical villa, approximately the height that would be permitted under the approximately the distance that would be permitted under the GRZ rules. And we just say that it would completely dominate the neighbourhood and overshadow the lovely original houses in our area. Now, the rest of the submissions I've put before, so I'm not going to repeat those, except to point out that high-density apartments will create immense shade, privacy will be lost, they'll create wind effects, there'll be intensified noise, there'll be a lack of car parks because they can't be mandated, so the streets in the area will become glorified car parks. And there's no evidence that high density is going to improve the use of public transport in any way. We know ourselves that people don't use the public transport to go into town. It just isn't frequent enough, and it still means it's not practical enough if you want to go and do your shopping in the supermarket and so forth. So we say there's no evidence that intensifying the housing in our area is going to increase the use of public transport. And we also say that it will destroy the social cohesion that already exists in our neighbourhood. It's paragraph on page 11, number 39. The continuous preservation of the original character of the Vigor Brown area and the protected area as a whole over 100 years disproves the council assertion. Generations of residents have by their love of the area, created and maintained social cohesion and a real sense of community. They continue the work of their forebears and look to pass this heritage to future generations. Community grows by slow accretion and the voluntary daily involvement of residents who share values of neighbourhood. The houses in the Vigor Brown area and the protected area have stood the test of time. In stark contrast, Napier's modern experiments with large apartment blocks have been beset with construction defects, lengthy litigation and high repair costs. See, for example, the West Quay apartments and the waterfront apartments in Humber Street. It is not possible, as the Council appears to believe, to artificially create community by destroying community. The imposition of 6-storey apartment blocks will undermine social cohesion and shatter the existing vibrancy of the area. It will reduce or remove the option for people who want to live in an area that has retained its heritage character. So they are my submissions, unless the panel has any questions for me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chan. Just a question from me before I turn to the panel. Your release orders to rezone that big block bounded by Carnell, Joel, Kennedy and Georges
Yes.
To general resident. Have you considered any other way of perhaps achieving what your group is seeking in terms of relief? I'm thinking particularly in terms of the height to recession plane controls, which you say are inadequate to address the issues you're raising.
Yes.
And I'm looking at Joel Street and George's Drive in particular, where the houses on those two roads are quite some, the sections, shall we say, rather than the houses. The sections are quite some distance from the two streets of concern. So, you know, a blanket rezoning to general residential would sort of basically remove that intensification potential from those roads.
Yes.
Has your group looked at alternative ways of achieving the relief?
No, we haven't looked at changing different rules to achieve something similar, no.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the panel?
No questions for the submitter, but just to emphasise to the officers, I think our request earlier this morning was for you to look at the impact on housing capacity should the area shown in diagram 2 of the evidence now before us be zoned entirely GRZ. And I note that per 359 of the officer's report for historic heritage, it recommended an expansion of the Napier South Historic Heritage Overlay. So there's already going to be a larger area of GRZ than is shown on the map in front of us. So that's, you could use that recommendation as the base and then look at the block that's in diagram 2 and just tell us impact on housing capacity if the remainder of the block was GRZ or the remainder of the block was MRZ. But use the historic heritage section 42A report recommendation as the starting point.
Might I also add, sir, that it might be of use to see what difference it would make if that area were kept as general residential as well, because it might be that the difference is actually remarkably small.
That's just what I've asked for. Yeah.
I thought you said MRZ as opposed to
both options.
Oh, was it both?
Yeah,
I see. Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
No,
Sorry.
that's right. It's probably speaking softly, but
Thank you.
as long as the officer's here. Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chan.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Eileen Smith. Welcome. Please take a seat.
This is an interesting one.
Okay, we have a copy of your submission in front of us.
Good.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
that, and I will get the map for it as well, so that I can see exactly where we're looking at.
5A Terrier Road.
Right. Okay, I've got the zoning map in front of me, so thank you very much. You're welcome to talk to your submission
Thank you very much. That's my husband, Peter, over there.
Peter.
So I thought you might like a little bit of history in this wee piece of land. When we bought our home in 1985, there were 2 railway lines in the area. And sometime later, the second railway line was removed. And it seems that this piece of land was renamed 5A Taradale Road and designated as residential. As involved residents, we were not notified of this change. It was only when Kayanga Ora proposed building on this land that we became aware of the change in designation. Currently, 5A is well maintained, with the grass being cut regularly and the palm trees being trimmed. So if the designation is changed, what could this little piece of land be called? On the corner of Hyderabad Road and Taradale Road is a small piece of land with several trees on it, including a magnificent redwood that the council lights up every night. This land is designated open space zone, and we wonder if that would be suitable for 5A as well. We acknowledge there are other green spaces nearby, and perhaps 5A could join them. In your summary of the submission we made, we do wonder if our comments have been misinterpreted. We feel this piece of land is not suitable for any residential designation, let alone high-density residential. Building any residential property beside a busy working railway line, as well as a busy state highway, causes many safety concerns. If you decide to reject our submission and leave 5A as residential, we would hope you include a rule that any residential development would be very low density and that on-site parking is provided, bearing in mind there is no provision for on-street parking on that side of Taradale Road. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very clear. Any questions, Ms. Smith?
Yeah, just some questions for the officers. So just looking at the Kiwi Rail designation, it appears to me that 5A is outside the designated area. Who's the owner of 5A? Can the officers find that out quickly?
Yep.
John, can you take me off? Thanks. Sorry, I should be able to. Let me just bring up the other maps.
Sorry, just bear with us.
That's all right. We also have the support of our neighbour on the back who's 5 Taradale Road.
Yeah.
This is Land Information New Zealand.
That's Lynn's.
Surplus land under Lynn's.
That's Lynn's. It's outside the Kiwi Rail designation. It's Lynn's. Did Lynn's lodge a further submission in response to this submission? No?
No.
All right, so in the reply report, can you please specifically address the rezoning of 5A as open space zone?
Okay, just one question from me. When you say if it were retained as residential zoning, what kind of low density development are you envisaging for this site?
Very single story with off-street parking.
And that off-street parking would come off Taradale Road?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have to, yeah.
And they'd only ever be able to turn left because of the,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you. No, I have no questions. That was very clear. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Your time. Peterson. Welcome. Give you a moment to set up.
No?
Good morning, everyone. It's a little bit hard to hear you speaking back to me. It may be because I live in Napier Hill and a bit
closer to
deafened by the port
Right.
noise.
As long as we can hear you, that's the main thing.
Yeah, right. I've made a submission because I've been heavily involved in the development of Bayview since 1996. By my calculation, that's almost 30 years. So I moved down from Auckland, where I was living at the time, and I'm very pleased to be in Napier because I like the size of the city compared to Auckland or any other larger city. So you've got my submission, haven't you? So I'm not intending to read that, but just make comments about it. Now I've misplaced my glasses.
Oh. I can't help you there.
No. So, in my submission document, I'll just quickly run through it. I was honoured to be asked, as a result of my involvement with Four Wheel Developments Limited over many years, my deal was 15% of the project profit. However, the way things turned out, my 15% is nothing because it was worth nothing. It got taken over by the mortgagee company. But I was really honoured to be asked by the current owners of that site, 68 Franklin Road, to be or act as the project coordinator. I don't have any formal qualifications, but I've done a lot of project development, Auckland, Central, and the surrounding areas, rural, etc., etc., etc. And I came down to Napier because the bank manager of Four Wheel Developments wanted me to come and help out the Nichols family. But to be asked to take over again, not take over, but to act for Steve Brownlee and his family, I was the project coordinator. And I likened myself to a conductor of an orchestra because I know what a violin should do, but I wouldn't have a clue about how to play it. It's a bit like that job when you're dealing with a whole lot of different consultants. You need to understand what they're on about, but also you try and find the best ones you can to represent you. So for the 68 Franklin Road site, there were 14 consultants. And I bought that because that's the box of all the reports that were done for the current resource consent that's been approved. And so that was a huge job. It takes time, and it's a bit like herding sheep. You're trying to make sure that the reports all relate to each other. Just a couple of minor things. My name is Petersen, not Peterson. I'm very proud of my Danish heritage. And the Greek, I noticed that many people misspell Bayview. It's two separate words. So I expect better from council staff. I know with spell check, it's not possible to cover it all. I made a mistake. I said it was LUC, that site. It's 6, it's actually 7. So that's the second lowest category of land classification. And it's zoned main rural, which has been a contention for me and others for a long time. Flood maps, the recent flood maps that's been done by Napier City Council, the whole of the coastal strip from West Shore to Bayview, Esk River, is not in a flood zone that covers a huge area of Napier, as you probably know. So in July 2023, the resource reapplication, I call it a reapplication because I did it before in the previous owner in 2008. I got a resource consent for 61 sites there. And then when the new owner took over, Steve Brownlee and family, he had to do it again because he ran out of time on the second renewal under section 127. And I understand that the reports for the recent application would be available to any of you commissioners if you wish to look at them.
A public record, yeah. Thank you.
So, up until recently, the most difficult issue to deal with Bayview was actually the issue of coastal hazards. Now, a lot of people that live at Bayview don't know this yet because we haven't publicised what we found out, but I was the one responsible for taking the Napier City Council to the Environment Court, and then we had the Regional Council walk in and help them out. We spent about $1 million, or the mortgagor spent about $1 million on that effort. It took 4 years, and I believe I found out recently that the council spent over $1 million each. That was just on the coastal hazard issues. From that was the coastal hazard zone that was put in place with a whole lot of evidence that took 2 weeks to present. That is now the coastal hazard line between Gill Road and Franklin Road, 24 metres back from the scarp. So what the time delay allowed us to do was to actually have another look at it. So that was done in 2003, and 20 years later there was the opportunity for someone else to have a look at it, and we got hold of a, I've gone a bit ahead of myself, a chap called Jim Darm, and he's a coastal geomorphologist. Now, someone who's got that qualification is ahead of a person or someone who is a coastal engineer. They understand what is going on in the coastal environment. So his reassessment came up with the evidence that he presented that the coastline at Bayview hasn't eroded for the last 50 years, and nor will it in the next 100 years, even taking into account the highest sea level rise from the IPCC at the moment. Now, when we had our case with the Environment Court, I found someone in the USA from North Carolina who's one of the top coastal experts in the USA. And he came to New Zealand, and he was the critical person who basically got us over the line with that Environment Court coastal hazard zone. So, if you want to see the effects of accretion at Bayview, you go to Fannin Street, have a look. Go to Mur Place. There's a stormwater pipe there that's covered all the time with gravel, and also there's an old shipwreck under the end of Gill Road that's buried. I had photos of it when it wasn't buried. And then there is, and that's at the end of Gill Road. So the good thing about Jim Darm, and it was peer reviewed by Tonkin and Taylor, and they came up with very few points, but the coastal strip between West Shore and the Esk River almost is a very safe place to build houses. I don't, but I would, but I prefer the hill. My comments on the Section 42A report. I commend Rachel and Paulina for the work they've done on that 193-page report, Section 42A. And I'm very impressed because for the first time since I've been in Napier, someone is accepting and recommending that that land be zoned residential of some type. Well done. So the first project I did was at Mur Place, off Gill Road. And it's interesting that those houses are now seen as high value houses. In fact, the sections are seen as high value sections. There's two left, owned by owners who intend to build. The owner of the section next to Gill Road was offered $1 million cash for that site, and he was told to go away. This gives you an idea of the increase in values of some of that land. Now, Steve Brownlee, and that site, we have 59 sections. So it's a very sought after area for residential housing. So I'm just going to make comments on what you've put in the section 42A on item 32. It just seems that the higher order urban growth strategies, which I've looked at most of them, seem to be out of step with reality. And Bayview is hardly ever mentioned. Now, at the same time that we were trying to, it was zoned deferred residential, i.e. all you had to do, or the developer had to do, was provide the services. In the year 2000, in the district plan, without any warning whatsoever, or any knowledge, that land was rezoned to main rural. It went from a value of $2 million, which it had been for many years because of its potential, to 167,000. That happened overnight. At the same time, with extraordinary and underhanded planning manoeuvres, the council rezoned what is now Parklands for about 1,000 houses. I'm not actually against it, but please note that the council has made that land developable by building up the land. I made submissions on it with a couple of other people, and that's what they would have done probably anyway. So the solution to flood zones is build up the land and everything around it. Otherwise, council wouldn't have been able to do that development. At the same time, that was the impact. So the funder said, you go and find the best people you can in New Zealand and get that sorted out. It took me 4 years. And while the council has done some infrastructural upgrades to Bayview, it has still not addressed the fact that some 400 houses along the coastal residential strip have no reticulated sewage. Where's it go? Into the gravels, and that's the only reason they can get away with it, because that gravel's 7 metres deep. And most of those along the coastline are still not complying systems. So they could at least spend some of the parkland money on upgrading Bayview. So Bayview has already been a long-established residential development. Just look at the age of the houses there. The railway went through in 2013, and they had to go through a whole heap of sections with houses on them to actually get that railway line in place. So I don't know how long houses have been in Bayview, but it's been a very long time. It's residential. It's actually in the this current district plan classified as a rural environment. Some of it is, but some of it is not. So it seems to have been left out of all the reports about potential residential development, real residential development in Bayview. There's still plenty of land in Bayview that is suitable for residential development. And one of the things I believe is that every residential property of a higher density reduces the demand for the spread of urban development on highly capable, versatile soils on the Hiratonga Plains and surrounding areas. Once land is developed for housing, it is gone forever. And you know, it's a big issue up in Auckland. Bombay, one of the great areas for growing vegetables, etc., 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 getting covered in houses. Why? It'll be interesting to see the final result in the FDS. So let's hope that one is a positive one for us. Matters raised by submitters. Covered that. And it's interesting to see that the Ahuriri, they're looking at quite a substantial project there, and I think that would be really good for Bayview, but they will need to raise the land and do a whole lot to justify a residential development down Onehunga Road and the impacts on the estuary, on the Ahuriri estuary. The thing about the coastal strip is it doesn't drain stormwater or anything else into the Ahuriri estuary. And one of the things I realised just going through this is that Napier is an urban city. It has very little rural land. And I was at the presentation on the Do Local Water Better the other day. And you know, you've got a supply of 27,000 properties that are on the reticulated system. If you multiply that by an average of 2, that's nearly 60,000 people. So there's very few of the population that actually live in rural areas. And one day when Steve Brownlee's solicitor and planner from Auckland, the ones that I got for him, I drove them down the road to look at the site down Rogers Road, and I just said to them casually, I said, what sort of environment is this? They both instantly said, it's a residential environment. It's not a rural environment. So those are from two people who are very experienced at land planning and the RMA. So I was the project consultant and manager who succeeded in the previous resource consent being approved for 61 sites on that land, and also the strip on the other side of the railway. It used to be railway land. So essentially the resource consent has been approved now, is a re-application, or was a re-application. In my view, the site should be renewed as a general residential zone similar to West Shore. If West Shore had its current zoning, that would apply. So what is the difference between West Shore and Bayview? West Shore has always been owned by Napier City Council. Bayview has not. But the investment hasn't been made in Bayview to actually upgrade services so that it would equal West Shore. So what else is different? Not much. So on the new development, all services will be provided. Now, that land has been approved twice for a residential development on rural zoned land. And that's by 4 different commissioners, 1 on the previous one and 3 on this one. I think. And so it's gone through it's gone past and been approved by 4 commissioners. So the inappropriate zoning of that coastal property and other land has been an incredible cost to the developers, both the previous one and the current ones. So what I wanted to do now, to finish that, is just very quickly, I only thought of this the other night. So there's, that's all the reports that have been done. Whoop, turn them around the other way, doesn't matter, you can't see them anyway. But those are all the reports that have been done for the current application. There's 10 on all the different aspects of developing the site. And then, on top of that, we have a previous person who used to work for the Napier City Council, Jan Ellis, that's their engineering reports on that site. All of that. So if you put all that together, the current owners have spent, I don't know how much, but a lot of money on getting it getting the application renewed. But all of those reports are actually applicable to most of the Bayview coastline. So if you want to justify changing it to a residential zone, we have all the evidence you need. That probably does me, unless you have some questions.
Okay. Questions?
So, Mr Peterson, you may well remember that Councillor Brosnan and I were on the hearing panel for 68 Franklin Road, which we granted consent for that development. So we're very familiar with the site and
Yes.
the reports that you referred to. And you may also be aware that, as you mentioned, the officers have recommended rezoning that site to settlement zone. Now, we've received legal submission from Mike Dosberg. Do you remember Mike Dosberg was counsel?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's a mate.
Yeah, so he's filed submissions and he supports the settlement zone that the officers have recommended, and he's advised us that he does not seek either a development area or a special precinct over that area.
Yep.
So pretty much that's the advice that we have in front of us at the moment. So just wanted to make sure you're aware of that.
And they're a bit like a horse that's got to the end of the race and run out of steam, and they just are very, very thankful that they've got what they've got. But I'm looking at it from my perspective is that I think that it deserves not to be a settlement zone, but I like the idea of it being a special zone. Because even at 800 square metres, they're quite large sites. It's not actually best use of the land that it could be used for. And I haven't had that conversation with Steve, and I know what their view is currently. But in actual fact, it's not the best use of the best coastal site left in Hawke's Bay. The reason it's 800 square metres is because it's in that zone. It could be a denser development. So that's my view, and I respect the view of the developer. I've done these submissions independently, but let's take a big step. Council, let's take a big step and zone it, how can I put it, as an urban development. The interesting thing is it doesn't use any of the Bayview infrastructure except Franklin Road. Doesn't use any of the streets that aren't up to standard. It will be separate in terms of wastewater treatment. Council invited us to be part of the wastewater treatment once they get things organised. By the way, in the Three Waters Done Well, Bayview's not even mentioned again in terms of infrastructure for wastewater. So it's about time Napier City Council realised that parts of Bayview, particularly that coastal strip, should be residential or a particular residential zone for Steve Brownlee's land. He might give me a bonus for getting that over the line. But that's the point I'm trying to make. Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay. Any other questions?
No, I'm very well familiar, and I think you're very clear. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. No.
I mean, yeah, you're right. Yep.
Thank you for your attendance today. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Probably my last shot.
I'm sure. Okay. Well, the hearing for hearing stream 6 will adjourn for lunch, and we will reconvene at 1:30 when we have the surveying company before us. So thank you very much, everyone.